everyone. So today I want to speak about the difference between loneliness and being alone. Quite often, being alone isn't lonely. Quite often, being alone is actually quite cathartic. I am ridiculously sensitive and I get overwhelmed by too much energy, too much noise, too many people, crowds, a lot of people in a situation, a lot of info coming at me all at once. And I enjoy my alone time. There was a stage where my maximum people time in a day was 3 hours. You could actually set your watch. By 3 hours, I was so agitated. I was looking for exits. I was looking to run. And then I met my ex. And suddenly, 24 hours, 7 days a week wasn't an issue. And I didn't need to recharge, I guess. Because isn't that what one does once overwhelmed by too many people? And I wonder how a lot of other people do this recharging. You know, people with families, people who live in households or accommodations where there are more than one person. I get the happy, loving partner concept because that I could do without any problem. My external people issue continued. So with my ex, I was quite happy to be with him all day, every day. But even with him, seeing other people for more than 3 hours was a chore. It became a chore. But I didn't have to recharge from him. So I get that side of it. I get you have a happy, loving partner and you don't need to recharge from that person. But how do you get alone time when you're living in a hostel or a shelter or some form of commune? Yeah, sure, you can go to your bedroom, given that you don't share your bedroom. But you can't exactly coop yourself up in your bedroom day in and day out. You still need to interact with people. So, being alone isn't necessarily lonely. Because realistically, when you're alone, if you want to, you can find company. You can go out and speak with people, interact with people, associate, mingle. But where does loneliness come in? So, loneliness would be where you're unable to connect with anybody, where you don't enjoy being on your own. It makes you feel as if you are excluded, where people tell you all the fun things they've been doing without extending an invite. And those are the people who are supposed to be including you. Where you have nobody to share your innermost thoughts with. And ultimately you end up completely alone. And you don't enjoy it. You get to a point where the completely alone is a burden. The completely alone is lonely. So what do you do to prevent that loneliness? Well, I suppose you can take up a hobby. Hobbies allow you to focus your mind on something other than yourself. And with a little bit of luck, whichever hobby you enjoy is something that other people do, and you can actually share in that hobby with other people. But what happens when you get to the point where you have absolutely no interest in anything? You just don't have an interest anymore. You don't want to associate with other people because you can't trust them anymore. Because when you meet somebody, you're basically waiting for them to use, abuse, betray you. So you isolate. You isolate. And the very act of isolating makes you lonely. And ultimately you become more and more lonely because you need the personal human interaction. But history has taught you that interacting with other humans isn't a good idea because other humans harm you. And I know the way I'm speaking is absolutely every single person is going to harm you. That is what I'm saying. Realistically, every single person isn't going to harm you. Every single person is not exactly the same as the previous person. Nobody is the same as anybody else. You often find it in couple relationships where one or the other or even both partners have come from a bad previous relationship. And they treat their partner, their new partner, as if they're expecting that person to be the same as the previous partner. I suspect a lot of relationships break up specifically because of that. And it's because you expect it. You literally expect it. You basically wait for that person to repeat a behavior from your past. Unless, of course, you've done some serious healing and some serious soul searching to figure out why on earth you were party to that type of relationship. Because ultimately, a relationship where somebody does betray you or abuse you, you did play a part, even if it was just the part of a victim, an unsuspecting victim. Now, for the abuse to happen, you would need to have very, very low boundaries. Or there would need to be some or other mental disorder that makes you believe that the way that person is behaving and treating you is the way people behave and treat you. and it's normal. Normal. Now, what is normal and what is abnormal is different for everybody. I've mentioned in previous videos where, to me, a red flag is not a red flag. To me, it's normal. So I was attracted to partners who displayed the red flags, and to me they were green, because that was what I knew. Now I know better. Now I know better. Now I can learn and change and modify and heal. Now when I see a toxic behavior showing itself, I can stand up to it. Now bear in mind, I'm a particularly independent person. I can look after myself. I have my whole life. Now, somebody who leaves a very supportive family system, which may or may not be toxic, when they end up in a toxic situation, either they're going to go back to the supportive structure, or by the time they realize it's toxic, they will be so deeply entrenched that they would be ashamed to admit their failure, and they would stay there and become more and more reliant on their abuser. I thankfully am not in that position. I thankfully am well aware that I'm capable of supporting and looking after myself. I'm tired of doing it. I'm tired of always having my own back. I'm tired of making every single decision, of having to do everything alone, of not having somebody to turn to for support. But I'm quite capable of doing it myself. So why do people become lonely? Well, you become lonely because you deeply crave, yeah. You crave the human interaction. You crave the inclusion. You want to be a part of something. You know, humans aren't designed to be solitary. We're not designed to be it. The hermits and solitary people are an anomaly. They are not the norm. Because we are social creatures. And the social experiment that the world governments did with the COVID isolations, with the social distancing, limiting of contact, was horrendous. Because in order to survive, humans need their society, their social contact, their people. And a lot of people got very lonely. And as a result, the rate of suicide increased. Because people couldn't cope with it. Was it necessary? In my opinion, no. In my opinion, it was a super flu bug. It transmitted quicker. Healthy people died. Sick people died. unhealthy people died. But realistically, the numbers were nowhere near what the Spanish flu did. So, to me, it was a social experiment. It was a social experiment of isolating people and creating fear. And that isolation broke down social networks. It literally broke down social networks. I lost friends because I refused to get vaccinated. I lost friends because of that. I didn't judge the people who did get vaccinated. From my perspective, go ahead. My own personal body has an immune system. I've worked on my immune system. I'm literally a walking petri dish. So I don't get the common cold. I don't get influenza because my body is able to fight it, because I don't pump myself full of antibiotics and medications to assist my immune system. And I do know other people who also did not vaccinate. Some of them did get ill, some of them didn't. But that is all neither here nor there. The point of the whole thing was fear and isolation. And the isolation, in and of itself, is more deadly than any virus. You know, I look at the number of people who commit suicide, the number of people who were unable to function because they had lost their support network. And of course, in South Africa, during the entire debacle, we were also subjected to what we call load shedding. What this is 4 to 8 hours of forced electricity turn off, i.e. blackouts. Load shedding is just a cute word for it. So during those hours, people were unable to communicate because the cellular phone networks, their towers, the batteries run flat. And of course, one of the biggest fears during the enforced blackout is, will it come on again? Will it come on again? And they actually did some studies on it. And they found that people were okay with the blackout. But as the time came for the electricity to be turned back on again, the panic and fear would increase. Because if it didn't come back on at the scheduled time, you were guaranteed to be down for at least another 4 to 8 hours. And in a country ill-equipped for blackouts, that is terrifying, because your electric fence doesn't work, the battery runs flat. Your gate doesn't work, the battery runs flat. You have no lights, the batteries run flat. So people panicked round about the time that the electricity is supposed to come back on again. And of course, once the cellular towers' batteries have died, if they even have batteries, because the number of cell phone towers that are vandalized, where the battery backups are stolen, is off the wall in this country. You know, in a place like the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Germany, if you leave something somewhere, you can go back 2 days later and it will be there. In South Africa, you put your handbag in your shopping trolley and turn to a shelf. Your handbag is gone. And that's less than 5 minutes. So vandalism's a huge issue. And of course, then we have those who steal the cables. And when there is a power outage, a blackout, where the schedules are all announced, the thieves schedule their thieving. And cables were stolen. So the fear and isolation was greater. So now you have a COVID-enforced isolation. Then you have a blackout, government-enforced blackout. And after that, you have the potential to not be able to communicate, to not be able to bury yourself into another activity. You know, when they were doing the load shedding, and I put it in past tense, it's not strictly speaking past tense. It happens quite often, where they just decide off the cuff that it's time. And when it happens, particularly at night, there is not a hell of a lot you can do. It's difficult to read by candlelight unless you have solar power backups or a generator. You're pretty much in the dark for however long it is that the blackout lasts, which could be 4 hours, 8 hours, 7.5 days. You're pretty much without power. And there's not a hell of a lot you can do about it. So, over the entire COVID situation, people were isolated. The social fabric of society was broken down forcefully by government mandates across the world. Then we had the vaxxers versus the anti-vaxxers. So then we had war between, and war, arguments, bickering, bitching, isolation, ostracization between those who got vaccinated and those who didn't get vaccinated. With the vaccinated saying, you are putting my life at risk, and the unvaccinated saying, but you're protected by a vaccine, so what's wrong with you? What's the problem? So the social fabric of society has been broken down. And what was this saying? We're waiting for the new normal. Because it wasn't normal to be isolated. What was normal was for people to go places and gather. We would go to an outside picnic area and listen to music or watch a movie or whatever the case may be, have lunch. people would gather during their off time. And suddenly, that was gone. And a lot more people became lonely. A lot more people were unable to function. And that loneliness doesn't just go away. It's not a case of having a meeting with somebody and you are less lonely. It's being awake at 2 o'clock in the morning with absolutely nobody to speak to. It's realizing that if you slip in the shower and bang your head, nobody will notice. You know, people die in their homes, and it's only noticed when the flies come. Or eventually somebody says, oh my goodness, the grass has grown to waist height. There's posts stacking up on the pavement or newspapers stacking up at the door. I wonder what happened. Oh, maybe they were away. And then when the flies come, someone eventually says, oh wait, maybe there's a problem. And that's a reality in the society that we live in, where people are now so isolated. And a lot of that isolation was created by the enforced social distancing. So being alone isn't necessarily a problem, but loneliness can be deadly. And what has happened to society that we knowingly leave people alone? Because we do knowingly do it. So why? What has happened to the fabric of society that a newcomer to a group isn't welcomed into the group? So very often you don't have newcomers, because being a newcomer to a group, you end up sitting and listening to a group of people speaking about past events that they have experienced together. And that leads to loneliness in a crowd, which is probably worse than being lonely alone, because it highlights the fact that you are alone. It shows that you don't fit in. It shows that you're not part of the whole. So how does one overcome loneliness? How do you join a new group? Alone, as an outsider. Just something to think of. And maybe if you notice somebody in your neighborhood, or notice the absence of somebody in your neighborhood, maybe you will check and not wait until the flies come. Because that person could be deathly ill, and one person noticing could be life or death. So, is loneliness curable? Yeah. It's curable by a society who cares. And everyone can make a difference. Everyone can inconvenience themselves for an hour or two just to check if that person who is always alone is actually okay. It doesn't cost you anything to send a message or make that call. It literally doesn't cost you anything. So, being alone is manageable. It's a choice. Loneliness isn't a choice. Loneliness can happen in a crowd because you just don't fit in, because you have different interests, because you don't have a history with the crowd, because you don't have the same color, skin color, as that crowd, or the same social habits as that crowd. And I'm not speaking ethnicities. I mean, it could be ethnicity. Anyway, just a thought today. Have a great day now.